Hello everyone, welcome back to another video. Tonight I wanted to talk to you about the latest developments in the West Bank, the talks about the ceasefire in Gaza, and a warning and a threat coming from a senior aide of Benjamin Netanyahu calling to end the war immediately. More talks coming from Donald Trump, the response from Hamas, and talks from Israel about the preparation and the need to prepare for a war against Turkey, alongside a couple of other things that are very important. I'm going to start off with the West Bank. Now, the Palestinian Authority in the West Bank, they've had a crackdown on the Palestinian resistance for the past several weeks. They also had a crackdown against Al Jazeera network that has been covering the genocide more than any other network in Gaza and lost many of its journalists and reporters inside of Gaza. Now, the Palestinian Authority's excuse that they are having this operation against these illegal thugs and outlaw movements, something that, well, not many people are buying. Firstly, not many are buying it from within the Palestinian Authority. Many officers in their security forces refused to go on this campaign. It received harsh criticism internally from the Palestinian population and globally as well, seeing as they have armed men, but they do not fire a bullet against the Israeli occupation, illegally occupying territories in the West Bank, but only on those who are fighting the Israeli occupation. Now, that's not stopping the resistance in the West Bank. Today, there was an operation from the Palestinian resistance where there were casualties. From the Israeli side, 3 reported to be killed and 7 wounded, alongside 18 operations in total from the West Bank resistance. And yesterday, 2 of the prominent resistance movements in the West Bank, primarily the Al-Qassam brigades, the armed wing of Hamas, and the Al-Aqsa Martyrs brigades, the armed wing of Fatah, which technically the Palestinian president leads. However, this is an offshoot now because they don't really abide by the Palestinian Authority. They sent a warning to the Palestinian Authority telling them that we'd rather not have our weapons turning against you, and you need to stop this madness. We prefer to only target the Israeli occupation in the West Bank. And they also sent them threats in the form of certain actions. For example, side bombs detonating, not exactly next to the vehicles, but just in front of them, to tell them that we are able to do more. So you need to stop this operation against us in the West Bank. Now, how likely is the Palestinian Authority forces in the West Bank to listen to them? That's not very likely. The Palestinian Authority in the West Bank is part of the negotiations and talks with Israel. They're part of a system that has been there to protect Israel following the Oslo Accords just over 30 years ago. And part of their, a big part of their agreement is not to have any actions against Israel, but in action and enforcement against any armed Palestinian group inside of the West Bank targeting Israel. However, that did not stop the Palestinian resistance in the West Bank, and in the past 24 hours, they've had over 18 operations against the Israeli occupation. So despite the fact that they are faced with this campaign from the Palestinian Authority, they're clearly not forgetting who their main enemy is. Now, there are calls for the Palestinian resistance to actually escalate, but again, this will spiral to something potentially bigger that will only serve the interests of the Israeli side. So far, the Palestinian Authority in the West Bank, they are not declaring that they're going to stop this operation, despite its ineffectiveness. However, there have been previous escalations between the Palestinian Authority and some of the resistance movements in the West Bank, where certain mediators succeeded in de-escalating. Because at the end of the day, you're talking about the same people, and certain families will have people with the Palestinian Authority and people fighting with the resistance. So it's likely that there could be something at some point. However, we haven't reached that stage yet. The second thing that I wanted to talk to you about is Gaza. Now, there was a report that Israel withdrew the Kfir brigade a couple of days ago from Gaza that we spoke about at the time. And Israel is announcing that more and more figures from their Nahal brigade that's remaining in Gaza are being killed now from the 932nd Battalion. Israeli sources are saying that they lost most of their top figures in that brigade and across the Nahal brigade altogether. So the argument here is that the longer they stay there, the more that they're suffering. Now, more people inside of Israel are calling Benjamin Netanyahu to completely withdraw from Gaza, saying it's ineffective to stay in Gaza. What we're doing is not bringing any results, and it's time to completely withdraw and end the war. And one of these figures is a man called Natan Eshel. Natan Eshel is a very close person to Benjamin Netanyahu. And as a matter of fact, this man mediates between Benjamin Netanyahu and Itamar Ben-Gvir. Just in the past several days, he called on Itamar Ben-Gvir to have an apology, de-escalate certain tensions he had, and Ben-Gvir did. Now he's calling Benjamin Netanyahu to completely end the war immediately because it's not getting any results. More people are dying. The population in Gaza, according to him, who don't want a war, as in those who don't want a war, that will be beneficial for them. It will be beneficial for the Israelis, and it will also stop the bloodshed. It will stop the bloodshed of the soldiers. So long as Israel persists to remain in Gaza, they will be losing more and more soldiers. Jabalia, they've been there 5 times. They previously declared that they defeated Hamas in Jabalia, only for them to invade it for the 5th time, suffer the biggest amount of losses, and slowly start to withdraw some of its main brigades in Gaza, like the Kfir brigade. So this argument coming from the top figures just near Benjamin Netanyahu, very close to Benjamin Netanyahu, is significant. There's a change of tone from the top figures next to Netanyahu, and at the end of the day, they're saying that it's not bringing any results, them remaining inside of Gaza. Which, of course, was something that Abu Ubaida commented on, the spokesperson of Al-Qassam Brigade, the armed wing of Hamas. He said that the illusions of Israel, their hopes of beating the resistance, will not come true. They will not be defeating the resistance. And the more they remain in Gaza, the more they lose. They will suffer more and more losses because we're not going to stop. That's something the Palestinian resistance has been saying all this time for the past year since the genocide began. But now Trump again is saying that all hell will break out if the hostages, according to him, are not released by his inauguration. Now, he previously had a statement like this before, and the thing is, like, what do you mean hell? Like, one of the top figures in Hamas, Osama Hamdan, he said that, what do you mean you're threatening us with hell? There is no, the situation in Gaza is bad as it is. You can't blame these people with hell. He said, we're not afraid of Donald Trump, Osama Hamdan said, and we can't have a deal based on what's going on now in 2 weeks. And Hamas have been blaming Netanyahu and the Israeli side of delaying everything when it comes to the negotiations. And Osama Hamdan, he also made several statements in one of his speeches he made in Algeria that the resistance will continue. It's going to continue. It's not going to stop. And the aggression will not break it despite all the sacrifices. He also said that we look forward to stopping the aggression against our people, and the occupation was obstructing the negotiations at every moment. Again, signaling that it's Benjamin Netanyahu delaying reaching a ceasefire. Now, Hamas, from the beginning, told them they're willing to have an all-out deal and to not continue their operation. He also said that the movement's negotiating delegation is making a lot of efforts to achieve the goals of the ceasefire, a complete withdrawal of the occupation forces and the entry of aid. And that's something that Hamas proved time after time when it comes to the negotiations. They will have leniency. However, this leniency will not be cutting out or taking out the core principles from the Palestinian perspective, which are ending the war completely, withdrawing all of the occupying forces, allowing the people to go back to all of the locations inside of Gaza, allowing all aid in, and also rebuilding Gaza. And Benjamin Netanyahu, in any hopes of, prolonging this to try and extract more positions from Hamas, that's not going to work. That's simply not going to work with the Palestinian resistance, because they prove time after time that they fight under the harshest conditions. These losses that were mentioned by Israel, they were from attacks in the northern part of Gaza, the most northern part of Gaza. Jabalia, Beit Hanun, Beit Lahia. These areas are very close to the occupied territories, and the Palestinian resistance has been conducting the biggest attacks, and Israel is confirming that the tunnel system of the Palestinian resistance is still functional even under the Netzarim line, that the resistance is moving fighters and ammunition from the south to the north despite Israeli presence, and that they've recruited even more people. So now Hamas has more men to fight for them than they've had during in the early days, in the beginning of the genocide. And all of these talks coming from Israel are also an indication that there is a shift of the tone when it comes to the mainstream media too. Because don't forget, in Israel, the mainstream media is full of manipulation at the end of the day. But now more and more voices criticizing the war are popping out in Israel. And this close Netanyahu aide, Eshel, calling to end the war immediately is a very significant development. And again, the argument that they have here is we've had the ceasefire with Lebanon. They have an opportunity to withdraw. If they don't withdraw, they're going to bring hell back on them again from the Lebanese resistance. But the fact that it worked in Lebanon, they've had a ceasefire and a slight de-escalation. That means they can have a de-escalation when it comes to Gaza. It's already known now in Israel that Hamas will not be beaten. The Americans told them Hamas cannot be beaten over half a year ago. Netanyahu is no longer talking about eliminating the Hamas altogether because he knows that's not possible. The only thing that's happening now is some of the top figures in Israel, including Netanyahu and Smotrich and Ben Gvir and their likes, are feeding this propaganda into some of their base that no, we will continue. Look at what we achieved so far, these fake achievements that they're talking about, and we shouldn't give Hamas the prize of a ceasefire now after all of this military pressure. However, they struggle to come with proof from the ground. At the end of the day, Hamas is still there. Israel is withdrawing from parts of Gaza. And it doesn't look like anything is stopping when it comes to the Palestinian resistance, despite Israeli attempts to try and punish the population in Gaza by these massacres, these ongoing massacres. And even that is not working for Israel. The following thing that I want to talk to you about, part of the work that we provide here and the news, the updates, what's happening on the ground, the true image of what's happening in Gaza, the reality of Israel, the reality of their conduct, the reality of the governments that support Israel is mainly due to, well, the mass propaganda coming from mainstream media. The propaganda in the mainstream media to a level where many people have boycotted now mainstream media. More revelations are coming about some figures in mainstream media. One of them is Rafi Berg. Rafi Berg, the BBC Middle East editor, is now exposed as a CIA and Mossad collaborator, according to a report and an investigation. Now, the thing here with the BBC in particular, it's public funded. It's supposed to be owned by the public, at the end of the British public who pay for it yearly, although many people, approximately 500,000, they canceled their licenses when it comes to the BBC, and that's something that the BBC did not have an answer for. And now these people are exposed as actual agents serving Israel directly. And part of the investigation that was published on multiple websites online spoke about the fear environment when it comes to reporting on Palestine, scaring people off, twisting narratives to be more suitable and in favor of Israel, direct manipulation, and of course the headlines like people dying in Gaza. It's like, who killed them? 50 people dead. What happened? Israel says terrorists found in a hospital. Titles like that and headlines similar to this, especially when compared to other conflicts around the world, they've shown the true colors of news networks like the BBC, now with confirmed agents working within their organization, and other mainstream media outlets as well. Now, this is something that many people are already aware of, but the fact that there's more and more evidence coming about certain figures from these networks being actual agents and collaborators, and by the way, it takes a lot to prove these things, so the connection would have been very clear with these people and their communication with either the Mossad or the CIA or any other intel, says a lot about the level of coordination coming with them and how hard mainstream media works to twist the narrative and push for the propaganda and lies when it comes to Palestine, even 15 months after this genocide began. Some of them are still questioning the word genocide. Some of them refrain from using the word genocide. They still use terminology that is in favor of Israel. They do not criticize Israel or Israeli leaders to the same level that they criticize the Palestinian side. They delegitimize the Palestinian armed resistance against Israel, but they do not delegitimize the Israeli genocide army conducting a full-scale genocide, mass-scale terror, and with a head of state in the form of Benjamin Netanyahu, the prime minister, wanted for war crimes for the ICC, and they also have a case of genocide in the ICJ. These things are very important, and they are also a reminder not to trust mainstream media, even if they come up with certain information that might be right, because some of them, what they will try and do is push for a few, news briefings here and there that might be more accurate to attract more audience, because they're losing audience, to build some of that lost trust, only to feed you the poison at a later stage. The following thing that I want to talk to you about is Iran. Iran is preparing. We've been talking about their military drills, and now they're saying that they have these new air defense system that intercepts bunker busters. They're revealing. And not only that, they're saying that they have cities of drones and missiles that they will be unveiling at one point as well. Iran, that has a pending response to Israel in the form of True Promise 3, well, it's clearly preparing for something to come. Before they had this Israeli attack against them, they had 2 operations against Israel. And many observers were criticizing Iran for the delay and the fact that this delay led Israel to conduct even more terror against Iran and against the Palestinians and the Lebanese too. However, from an Iranian perspective, they clearly want to be protected as a state as well. And the fact that they were successful in intercepting a lot of the projectiles that came following the Israeli attack on them in October indicates that there's something happening there. Don't forget, there's also a pending agreement that they were due to publish with the Russians too. More talks about coordination, including with defense and military with China. All of these things are very important, especially if Iran would want to conduct an operation against Israel that would be at a larger scale than before, which could potentially lead to an open exchange back and forth, not just a restricted blow, waiting for another response from Israel. Despite the geographical distance, despite the fact that, well, it's not very easy for both countries to engage in an open war altogether day by day. But Iran is indeed preparing. Now, the other argument about Iran's delay in response is the fact that they're giving time, or the notion that they've been giving time to a ceasefire. And they've had a ceasefire in Lebanon, albeit fragile. Now there are talks about a ceasefire in Gaza. The Iranians might be waiting to see if that succeeds. If we have a ceasefire in Gaza, the Iranians would say, well, look, our lack of response led to that. Again, that's their argument. Whether their argument is correct or incorrect, that's a separate story. But that's the notion that's coming from Iran, because back in July, the Iranians were saying, just before the second response, the Iranian president said, we've given them time. The Americans told us, don't attack Israel yet. The ceasefire is just around the corner. However, we've had months and then we had to respond. Are they going to be facing the same situation now? And is it a case of Iran believing the American administration or the Israelis, or is it purely for their own interest, because they, as a state, are not really interested in war at the end of the day? None of the countries in the region are interested in war, but these wars are imposed on them by Israel and the powers that support Israel, the neo-colonialist state and its backers. They've constantly been pushing for wars and mass terror and aggression in the region. And the countries in the region, well, they would find their way to tackle this aggression. And Iran, with its position, it's not a popular position that they're taking, or not a popular or common position that they're taking in comparison to other states. Other states are very inactive when it comes to the genocide. Iran was the only country in its entirety, as in government level, official state, public support in the army, fighting or attacking Israel twice in the past year. The other resistance fronts, if we talk about Yemen, for example, or Lebanon, parts of the state are targeting them. In Yemen, there are two governments, but the majority of the power is in the hands of Ansarullah. They are still attacking Israel. Hezbollah, you're talking about a movement within a country, and likewise with the Iraqi resistance that now actually decreased their levels of attacks, if not completely stopped them, against Israel. So Iran is sitting there on its own with that position, and that's not something very easy. And Iran has proven that they still can do it, although other countries around them are not really supporting them, but in some cases working against the Iranians. And the final thing that I wanted to talk to you about is a panel. There's a committee for the Israeli government that is calling now for Israel to prepare for a war with Turkey. There was a report on multiple Israeli media outlets about the Nagel Commission. Turkish reinforcement in Syria may pose a direct threat to Israel. The report emphasizes that Turkish reinforcement in Syria, as part of its efforts to restore the Ottoman crown, according to them, may create new threats for Israel. The recommendation: prepare for a direct war with Turkey. This is something that we've been talking about ever since the dramatic changes inside of Syria and the growing Turkish influence inside of Syria, because Turkey has been one of the main backer, really, of the Syrian armed opposition. And despite multiple attempts to try and reach a political solution with the now fled President Bashar al-Assad, it hasn't succeeded. Now, with this presence and with attempts from the Syrian new interim government to establish a full state, a Ministry of Defense, a full functioning country, have alliances, have potential defense pacts and strategic agreements with multiple countries, that's something that's worrying for Israel. Because from an Israeli perspective, they would rather deal with movements. They don't like to deal with states with an official state level. They want countries to be torn. They want to deal with certain movements that are delegitimized internationally. Israel, what they do is they lobby countries to take movements out the law, or make them a terrorist organization, prescribe them as a terrorist organization, therefore disabling them to a very large extent, and also stripping them of legitimacy. There's a problem when you deal with a state, because you can't just delegitimize a state as a whole. It's a bit more difficult. And also, especially if that state is backed by another large country with connections globally. From an Israeli perspective, they are still delegitimizing the new Syrian government. One of the key figures in the Israeli foreign ministry in the past couple of days, he was warning global leaders that no, these people in Syria, they haven't changed their skin actually. And the foreign minister himself, Gideon Saar, said they are a terrorist gang from Idlib who are taking over. We don't trust them. They're terrorist jihadis, they call them, and they are looking to have an Islamic state next to us, and the Turks are backing them. So from the Israeli perspective, they still cast doubt. They still strip the new interim government of legitimacy in attempt to fight the Turkish attempt to restore or instill or have a state inside of Syria that is stable, that has a good economy, that is going to be rebuilt, that has more refugees coming back, 9 million refugees across the world to come back, rebuild their country, and also be a strong, independent and sovereign state without any other foreign country imposing their will on the Syrian people from abroad. Now, the Israeli attempts now inside of Syria are based on certain minorities inside of Syria that will potentially have their own self-governing zones. They're hoping that the United States will increase the support for SDF in the northeast. That's the biggest bet for the United States and Israel inside of Syria. But that's where the fiercest current campaign is ongoing by the Syrian National Army, by armed opposition groups or interim government groups backed by Turkey. Turkey is conducting attacks in the northeastern part of Syria. And despite the fact that there have been talks and negotiations between the SDF and the interim government and Turkey, things are still escalating. The SDF, from their perspective, they changed the flags. They said we're willing to negotiate. However, they're still backed by the United States. And the United States, they don't have an interest in having an independent and sovereign Syria that works for its people. They have an interest in having multiple states that constantly fight each other, divide and rule, and for Israel to be the queen of the region when it comes to technology, when it comes to power, when it comes to economy, and when it comes to energy. The United States wants Israel to be the main energy hub, the main economy hub, the main superpower in the region. And the Israelis know that the Turks are some of their biggest opponents in that field, on all these fields: economy, military, oil, and other fields as well. And now the talks that are coming from Israel is that we could be facing a front here that is far worse than the Iran front that was there before. In the video that I posted yesterday, I spoke about the Israeli-made General Itzhak Brik saying that we could be facing tens of times more evil from this front on our Syrian borders than what we had with Iran, because now we could be talking about state-level actors rather than certain movements or just some influence here and there. Now, what will happen if Israel prepares, for example, for war with Turkey, and is that likely to happen anytime soon? Well, there are different arguments when it comes to that. First and foremost, when it comes to Syria, the new interim government, they need to have full territorial integrity. In the northeast, Israel is occupying parts of the south. Don't forget the occupied Golan. They've been occupying the Golan Heights for 57 years now. That needs to be dealt with too. And then talk about uniting the country, rebuilding the country, and having a stable force. The Israeli actions are coming to try and take it one step ahead, be one step ahead from the Turks and from the Syrians themselves. They're hoping that there would be a delay when it comes to the Northeast. However, the comments coming from Trump, unlike his comments with Gaza, have been somewhat reluctant in sending more US troops. Trump previously withdrew certain troops from Syria, and he is not very interested in having an escalation, especially with a NATO member in the form of Turkey. Now, on the ground, they're both fighting. The US and Turkey are fighting inside of Syria. They're both supporting opposite sides, and they have different interests. They're having diplomatic talks, they're having negotiations, but there's a clear big difference. Like there are differences within many countries that are members of either the NATO or any other organization too. So it's unlikely that the United States will decide to all of a sudden send reinforcements that will become a full-fledged war, or will lead to a full-fledged war between them and the Turks, because now Turkey is not using all of its force in northeast Syria, and the US, they're indicating that, slowly we want to start withdrawing from this area. And Trump, when he was speaking about the Syrian situation, he even complimented Erdogan himself. He said it was an unfriendly takeover, but this man is very smart. He knows what he wants, and. So unless there's something very significant that's going to change with the Trump administration when it comes to Syria, that could turn in the favor of Israel, the Syrians are on the path of liberating their country completely, taking full control, having everything belonging to the interim government. And that, at that time, will start posing an even bigger threat to Israel, and that could attract a potential clash between them and the Turks. That is, unless Israel decides to escalate even further from now inside of Syria, and will make it inevitable for Turkey to make certain moves inside of Syria that will lead to a larger clash, maybe to a level of a war between them and Israel.